This is Michael Ostrolenk. Welcome to our radio, where we explore individual and social transformation through collaborative action. Today's show is brought to you by Casper Scafidi, an amazing body worker in the Northern Virginia area, who has integrated different somatic practices into his work, including rolfing. To learn more about his work, you can visit his website at www.casperscafidi.com. That's COSPERSCAFIDI.com. Today's guest is Johnathan Lang, who is an Iraq War veteran and natural movement coach who loves helping folks find more meaning, health, and wholeness in their lives. An American by birth, Johnathan has also lived, coached, and explored in East Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. He has been coaching for over 10 years and holds certifications in a variety of body-mind disciplines, including MoveNat, Animal Flow, and Movement Origins. His training and facilitation experiences ranges from the U.S. Army to adventure challenge therapy to co-creating holistic wellness programs with corporate clients. He currently is currently developing his dream natural movement lifestyle in the jungles, rivers, and mountains of San Rafael, Colombia. His ultimate aim is to create a dedicated retreat and research center for the integration of natural movement with permacultural, ancestral medicine, and other transformational psychotechnologies to help create the conditions so that more humans can live in harmony, steward the earth, and explore the stars together in the 22nd century and beyond, or at least do so doing some fun stuff in the woods. How you doing, Johnathan?
Excellent, brother. How are you?
Good, man. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
I love your vision of wanting to kind of create this healing center that brings together all these different technologies and integrating it with permaculture.
Yes, sir.
Before we kind of unpack that vision of yours, which I want to offer all my resources in my communities to help support that, because I think it's an amazing vision.
Yes,
Tell us
sir.
a little bit about, how you got into movement, how you got into wellness practices, how you got into psychotechnologies, as you call them.
Hey, so we cut out for a minute. So listeners, please bear with us. We're actually recording from the middle of the jungle in Colombia, 4 hours outside of Medellin, Colombia. I live off of a dirt path that's a half hour from the closest town by horse. So we have satellite internet here, and it's a bit of a cloudy day. And when the clouds go over, sometimes the satellite gets cut. But I heard most of your question, Michael, which was, for me, summing up what I understood was, how did I get into all of this stuff, right?
Yep.
Basically.
Excellent. Yep.
Okay.
A little bit of your story, Johnathan.
Okay. So I'd actually like to read something.
Sure.
And this kind of sums up the why for me. How did I get into all of this? This sums it up from kind of the highest level perspective that I can give at this moment, and then we can go back down into like actual causes and conditions and all that kind of stuff, right?
Love it.
So, as Michael already said, I am an Iraq War veteran. I spent a year in Baghdad as a reconnaissance soldier from the end of 05 to the end of 06. That was, for me, age 20 to 21. So I turned 21 over in Iraq. I was manning a gun on a guard shift for my 21st birthday. I remember that. And so anyhow, being there, I saw a lot of death and a lot of destruction and a lot of violence and a lot of disharmony. And I also was blessed to see a lot of love, a lot of sacrifice for the better, a lot of selfless service. So I could say in a lot of ways my experience there shaped me. It was quite formative for everything that came after. And, I continue to integrate lessons from that to this day. And then helping me, helping me sharing from my experience helps me to help myself while hopefully helping others. So that's a huge driver, right? Now can you hear me? We have some juice being made in the background. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
All good so far. Yep.
Okay. So here's something that I wrote out a while ago that, it was just an articulation. It was an articulation at that time after 4 ayahuasca sessions of, kind of my why. And it was an articulation of some things that were going on in here that are beyond words, let's say, here, there, everywhere else. But here's some words to maybe help. So I am driven largely by 3 interrelated questions. 1, why were Justin and Santos slaughtered in Iraq? So Justin Jarrett was my battle buddy in basic training. And somehow, in all of the huge army, somehow we wound up in the same platoon that went to Iraq together. So that was a complete so-called random thing, just random chance, because usually somebody who's your battle buddy in basic training is going to go to a completely different post, and definitely not going to go to the same platoon in the same unit at the same post as you after you finish basic training, right? So Justin was killed in Iraq, and then also my other brother. Many people, many friends of mine and leaders of mine were killed, but especially Justin and Santos, we had very close personal relationships, even before we went overseas together. So why were Justin and Santos slaughtered in Iraq? And this is me continuing from the value system and the view that I had when I wrote this about 2 years ago, but it still holds pretty true. This is an example of the evil in people. So how do I work to constrain this in myself, right? In other words, this violence, right, is for me, it's in the relative plane, right? Everything is love, ultimately good. We're all everything and one, but we're here in this game of this human body meantime. So I like to use evil in that way, right? It's not this whole kind of, you're going to hell and all of this. It's more of a very strong, powerful, and helpful word for these situations where people are taking, power drills to other people's heads to torture them and cut people's heads off and all that kind of stuff that we experienced over there. So that's the first question. Why were Justin and Santos slaughtered in Iraq? This is an example of the evil in people. So how do I work to constrain this in myself? 2, why did that Iraqi man, and we can dig into this later if you like, and we can dig into all of this. Why did that Iraqi man, a stranger, risk his life to save mine? This is an example of the good in people. So good being the duality opposition to the evil in the first question, right? This is an example of the good in people. So how do I work to encourage this in myself? Okay, so that's question number 2, constant contemplation number 2 for me. And number 3, which kind of ties all of it up, is in light of the fact that my friends died, I live, and a man from the same people who killed my friends decided to save me. How do I work to constrain evil as defined by the first question, while aiming for the highest good as defined by the second question possible in the world? So those are, that's kind of a high flown articulation of why I got into all of this. And so there's a bit. Wow. What's the task? So what's the task related to that? At that time, I wrote this almost 2 years ago when I was living in Shanghai. I will masterfully integrate ancestral body, mind, environment, health practices into a system to help people to stand up strongly and courageously to the tragedies and evils of life as a human. And there we go. So I'm still, we're working on that. We're on that path, continuing. So I'll let you, whatever comes up for you. I'm here to listen, or any questions, anything.
So can you talk to me about the time you left Iraq to the time you formulated those questions? What was your life like?
Sure, yes. So came back from Iraq. It was dark, I'd say. Another way to put it would be dense. Let's say there was a lot of dense energy, or in another language, maybe a more psychotherapeutic language, there was a lot of, besides childhood stuff, besides everything before the army in Iraq, there was a lot of trauma from what was lived over there, things that I witnessed and things that I participated in and things that I was aware of, right? Which in some way of looking at, maybe those are all the same thing, but also sometimes our definitions can help us to even articulate things a bit better, right? So a lot of density, and I would say not a whole lot of helpful tools for working with that. Maybe some of the usual tools that live in our still are pretty prevalent and pretty much the default in our modern society, in our modern American society, which is numbing, right? A lot of, well, for sure, plenty of alcohol. Plenty of alcohol, just a lot of kind of withdrawing in general for the 4 months that I was in the army. When we got back, they don't just, you don't get out the day after. Thank God for that. Again, God meaning something quite big for me personally, right? But no.
I can hear you now. You're back.
Okay, good.
So
Okay.
the last thing
Where
I heard, you mentioned God. That's what you understand it.
Yeah.
And then you froze on me, which might actually have been an interesting time to freeze, because I think it gives the opportunity for people watching or listening to this to really be with the story you told to this moment. So if you wouldn't mind continuing. So you know, 4 months in after Iraq, you're still in the service. You use alcohol to numb yourself out. And other such things. Continue on if you don't mind.
Yes. So, as they say, hypervigilance was a huge symptom I was showing at that time too. Just really aware. I mean, in some ways, this hypervigilance there might be some aspect of that is so to say natural, from a kind of archaic kind of tribal perspective too. It's something that we don't have to think about as much when we have outsourced our security to so many different systems, and we have so much material abundance, so to say, right? But in Iraq, one becomes acutely aware of how easy it is for things to really fall apart, and for how important it is, at least in that case, to take responsibility for the safety of oneself and one's loved ones, the people around one, right? So, of course, I came home and immediately. Okay. Yeah. So I wasn't showing up in that. We got to the relationship, right, before it cut out. Okay. So I wasn't showing up there as I wanted to. So that was my experience when I first came back. And I got out of the army. I split with her. I separated from her. Um, and she stayed in Texas, where I was stationed. And I went back to where I was from in Pennsylvania. And there's a bit of a long story here that has to do with contracting and me getting accepted to go work for a contractor back overseas, where I would be doing similar work, but making a lot more money. And me at the last moment deciding that actually a better use of my uh, time, effort, energy, attention, life would be. Okay. Yeah. So we got to the part about contracting and me deciding to be the first generation in my family to go to college instead. Did we get there?
I do now.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. So that was my decision when I went back to Pennsylvania, and at the same time, I was still largely, I just come from Iraq. I was still a hard charger, so to say. So it was also good for me to work. I didn't need to. Uh, I had a lot of savings, and I had the GI Bill and all of that, but I wanted to work. So there was actually, my mother had moved to the Pocono Mountains right before I joined the army. And there was a place, a facility right across the street called Adventure Challenge Therapy, which was a wilderness therapy program for at-risk youth. It was court educated. Uh, it was for teens from the inner city to come into nature, and of course, there was a disciplinary aspect connected to that, and also a team building / community service aspect to that. And I really lucked out because I lived across the street, and because I just got back from Iraq, and because they really felt that my experience, I was a lot like those kids before I joined the army. That's a whole other story. That's another 3 podcasts. But because of the fact that I just come back from Iraq, and I was like, I was so to say squared away in some ways, at least. Uh, they were willing to take a shot and let me work there when most of the people had a bachelor's in psychology or more, right? And so I did for 2 years. I did that every weekend. I lived there. We would pick the clients, as we called them, up at different courthouses in the area. On Friday, take them to our compound in the mountains, and then we would stay there. We would live there all together. 6 to 10 counselors, depending on what was going on, and between 30 and 50 students, clients, every weekend. And we did various kinds of activities in the wilderness, a lot of things that connected with my military experience, and then also a lot of the fellows. It was all men. A lot of the men that I was working with were also more on this kind of what we might call a hippie type of path, definitely into all different kinds of alternative therapies and all of this. And I was not, I didn't know anything about that when I first started. But they liked me because the kids seemed to respect me, and I also seemed to care a lot about the kids, right? So, and I was, I was the guy who really led the physical training the most in the most kind of squared away type of way. So they really liked that. And so I got to learn quite a bit. And eventually I was also facilitating group therapy sessions there, which was pretty cool because it was nothing, it wasn't any of my training, but I kind of got on the job training from that. And so I did that for 2 years, and I got my associate's degree. I was going to school during the week, community college, and just general studies. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I had this inkling that I wanted to go back into the military as an officer, but I was really figuring out what was the future for me. After experiencing what I did, trusting the U.S. government in a not very much fashion, let's say, but still respecting the institution of the military a lot and respecting what I learned from my leaders, right? So there's that kind of tension there. There was that tension. And so I finished my associate, and, I wasn't really properly trained for what I was doing there with the at-risk youth. So we had a great time, and I'd be willing to say I've heard from a lot of people that I helped them. Yeah. And I'd also say that nothing showed up there on the job, but I think because I wasn't properly trained in anything related to psychotherapy, I took on a lot of the heavy stuff that they were dealing with, right? You have a lot of horror stories basically from what those kids are living. And so, we piled that on top of me coming back from Iraq and never really processing any of that. And after about 2 years, when I finished my associates, I was burnt. I came back and it was like, just go work, no weekend, just like study and then live at your job all weekend, then go back and study and ding, straight A's, all that kind of thing. And so I said, I'd saved up a nice chunk of change in that time. And I had this real burning drive to go explore the rest of the world. That was a big part of what drove me to join the military in the first place. Not everything, but that was something. And so I had this plan for the 2 semesters of the fall of 2009 and the spring of 2010 to go live in Latin America and study Spanish in the fall. And we have some geese here. They're eating. We have all kinds. This is an animal farm, not George Orwell either. Thank God. So, yeah, 2009 was supposed to be Peru, and 2010 was supposed to be Shanghai, China. And it ended up being, can you hear me okay? Okay. So I ended up going to Peru and studying Spanish for that semester. And China, I ended up saying, I'd rather go deeper into Latin America because I thought a semester wasn't enough. So the second semester, that spring of 2010, I went to Cali, Colombia. And that was my introduction to Colombia, where I'm at now. I had traveled there, actually. I traveled to Cartagena in 2009, and I traveled to some other places in Latin America, Panama, Peru, Costa Rica. And I just had heard, my professor in university was from Cali, Colombia. So actually, I probably wouldn't have went there. I would have probably been too afraid, or, it wouldn't have been on my radar. When I say afraid, just, you heard a lot of stuff about Colombia back then. It still was like that a lot back then too. There were, I would hear gunshots a lot at night, but that wasn't such a new thing for me. I was already in Iraq, so like. But either way, it was on my radar, and I did go, and that began a kind of 10-year relationship that continues to this day with Colombia. So there's a lot more that happened between between me getting out and where we're at now. But to fast forward a bit, I'll just fast forward. So after I got back from Latin America, I'll try to condense it, and then we can dig into whatever you like after. But after I got back from Latin America, I moved to New York. I did my bachelor's at Hunter College, CUNY Hunter College, in geography and economics. The plan was to become an officer, but at the same time, I had been diagnosed in the meanwhile with PTSD by the Veterans Administration, by Veterans Affairs, right? Did you hear, or did it cut out? Okay. So I realized I wasn't, that was, I love Latin America. I love studying people. I love the social sciences. Was studying geography specifically because I felt it was so related to what would make me a great military officer, right? From my point of view. And also because I was super interested in it. And to working in business development at Telemundo for NBC. I managed to tie my military experience and my... Did you hear me?
I heard you're trying to tie your military experience, and then I lost you.
Okay, yeah. So I managed to, with the folks at Telemundo, I tied my military experience, the discipline, and all of that. There was a big push in NBC at that time to hire veterans, right? I tied that with my kind of lived experience moving to Latin America, to places where most people weren't going at that time from the States, and kind of really integrating myself into that culture, not just being like kind of expat watching from the outside, but actually going into it. And, pretty much everybody that worked there was Latino. And so, and combine that with geography and some business applications of geography related to GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And so all the people that interviewed me kind of loved my background because it was this guy who went into their culture, in a very deep way. And, I go in and I'm speaking Spanish with everybody, and it showed that I really kind of did my homework, right? Like I put myself out of my comfort zone to learn about Latin culture. And that was really what being in business development at Telemundo at that time was all about. It was going into multinationals and helping them to understand the increasing, at this time, this was where I was at, helping them to understand the increasing buying power of the Latin market, so to say, and kind of translating back and forth between these cultures, right? So I did that for a year. It was great, but it wasn't fulfilling. I'll put it like that. I learned a lot. It was beautiful. The end goal there wasn't fulfilling for me. So let's fast forward a bit. I lived in Colombia a bit more. And then I came back to New York and I worked in a boxing gym. I managed a boxing gym in East Harlem. I had been boxing for a few years. Prior to that, I had been training people off and on, both professionally, first friends and then professionally. And I worked at a place called El Barrio Boxing, and I managed it in East Harlem. It was a nonprofit boxing gym again, related back to working with at-risk youth. It was primarily for the at-risk youth of the community. It was on 115th and Madison. So at that time, that was a pretty tough spot. And again, a big connection there. It's a Latin community. The owner, the director, the overall director of the organization, El Barrio Boxing, himself was an Afghanistan vet, a Puerto Rican American guy from the community. We clicked right away when we met. And so I volunteered and then ended up working there for the year of the middle of 2013 until almost the middle of 2014. And that was great as well. Learned a lot from that. Learned a lot about that community and related communities, right? And so super, again, integrating myself into just a completely different, I'm from a kind of rural, sort of rural Pennsylvania / small industrial city, Allentown, Pennsylvania. There is a large Puerto Rican and Dominican population in those two cities. So I grew up with a lot of kids from those populations who were my friends, which is why I was very into Latin culture in the first place. But yeah, that was a great experience. And at the same time, I realized that training people in boxing itself was also something that I could learn a lot from, but wasn't the end for me. Why? Because these kids, it's similar to a rock star dream, right? For a kid to come in there and be told that he's going to be like the next, he's going to be the next Floyd Mayweather, and that's going to get him out of that situation that he's in. There was a bit of some of the trainers in there from the neighborhood for their reasons, and they have their reasons. There's some selling of some dreams, and boxing tends to be, as it's said sometimes, one way of putting it, it's a dirty sport. Another way of putting it is that a lot of people who are in charge there are manipulating a lot of the fighters, so to say. And it was just a world that I loved, I learned a lot from, and I also realized that it was time for me to sort of say, in integral theory language, transcend and include, right? So that was what I did. I moved on from there. I moved to Shanghai, China. Long story to this, but we can tie it back to, by now we're 2014. We can tie that back to 2010, me having never gone there. And moved to Shanghai, China, and started working just as a personal trainer. I had various certifications, and I had been meditating already in Chinese Buddhist practices, which helped me with my symptoms, my PTSD symptoms, since New York. And I got deeper into Chinese Buddhism, Chan Buddhism, which is the Chinese precursor, so to say, to Zen Buddhism, kind of a very strict meditative discipline, we could say, really beautiful for me anyway. And I started to integrate more and more of what I learned from that into my personal training sessions. And I started to look more and more at my personal training sessions as not just a physical thing, but something that helped people find meaning, find alignment, and dare I say, even find love. That was starting, that was just starting at that time. But yeah, so that started me on this path of mindful and moving, which is what I began to call my personal training practice. I began to do wellness programs with companies because clients that I had referred me to their companies. And I started to integrate more and more of the meditation, the spiritual side into my wellness programs. And that bled back over into the personal training. And then I went and did a yoga teacher training. And then I found that I did various silent retreats. I spent like 100+ hours in very short time in a float tank. That was a whole other thing. That was great. I started to finally work on my emotional stuff with transpersonal psychologists who worked with ayahuasca over in China, in Shanghai. I found the work of various psychologists. Chiefly in the beginning was a fellow named, who you may have heard of, who has some of the things that he says, it might be controversial. I think we're all complex beings, but Jordan Peterson. I heard him on Jocko Willink's podcast after my second ayahuasca session, and that clicked a lot of things for me and finally let me really start to work on my shadow, so to say, right? So then I learned about Carl Jung and went deep into that and continued to work with my therapist and continued to work with the medicine. And so what? This was a 2017. You know, I'm bringing all of this back into my work with individuals, with organizations. Also, 2017, I found natural movement. That was just the kind of a perfect movement practice to help me to integrate a lot of these things that I was kind of taking this from that and this from that and kind of putting them together. I hadn't found integral theory yet, and I was just kind of doing it in my own kind of way, and it was working. People kept telling other people, go work with this guy or bring this guy into your company, all of that. But when I found MoveNet, it was kind of a piece that really gave me a strong, solid foundation that was culturally non-specific, unlike yoga or mindfulness from a Buddhist perspective, right? So it was this kind of universal natural movement practice that then let me stack all these other practices up on top of that, depending on the needs of the people, right? And then I found integral theory, and from there, now I had a whole kind of overarching system for even fitting in this ayahuasca stuff. I ended up facilitating a retreat, among others, over in China with Pera Merced, who is the director of Fractal Change, which he has a number of people that he works with over there in China, in a kind of gray area, let's say, but it's enough of a above the ground area that I can talk about it freely here in this sense. But yeah, we facilitated a retreat together that worked with plant medicine, with his side of ayahuasca and San Pedro, also called more traditionally Wachuma, which is a cactus that has mescaline, similar to peyote. And that was his side of things, plus the emotional coaching. He called his processes with ayahuasca, he calls them the Amazonian emotional process. And then my side was using natural movement and mindfulness meditation as a therapeutic practice to help give them tools like I didn't have when I came back from Iraq to integrate their experiences with the ayahuasca and all of that coaching and all of that back into their daily lives, right? So, yeah, I mean, we can, there's so much more, man. We didn't even get started on last year. But
so let me ask you about, we can fast forward to your present location.
Yes, sir.
So 2 questions for you. Talk a little about your short-term work in Colombia with MoveNet, and then I'd love for you to kind of unpack your vision for this retreat center that you talk about.
Yes, sir. Beautiful. So, starting with number one, with MoveNet here in Colombia. So I'm going to assume that the listener has some background of what MoveNet is. I know that you've spoken a bit about it, and also I'll quickly give a. And sometimes I speak Spanish all day, so actually I'm having the pleasure right now of speaking English, and sometimes I have to think of the words in English because I want to say them in like a Spanglish. But a quick summary of natural movement is that there's a lot of ways of looking at it, but we could say from an evolutionary perspective, it's the way that our bodies evolved to move as human beings for millions of years, living in contextually rich, constantly changing environments where we couldn't depend on anything but this and the people around us to survive. And so it's a movement system that really honors that, but doesn't necessarily just try to go back to that. Instead, kind of, again, transcending, including, trying to carry it forward. So how can we take that learning and integrate that back into our daily life if we do happen to work in an office, if we do happen to be 60 years old and haven't moved much since we were a kid, or if we're, for example, in quarantine and stuck in our house, what things can we learn from all of those millions of years of human experience? Quarantine. Did it cut out or it's okay?
We're good.
Okay. So that's a really quick overview of what MoveNet is, right? So I'm I say almost a level 3 trainer, which is the highest level of MoveNet trainer, which is the level that
Nice.
is required to give certification. I have a couple of tests left to turn in, a couple of movement-based tests that I'm still working on. So in the meantime, working towards those tests helps make me a better teacher. So it's been awesome, right? It's been an awesome process since doing the MoveNet L3 in September. And back in the end of August, after a roller coaster of a beautiful, horrifying, love-filled 2019, spending time in the Amazon, working with ayahuasca, with the Shipibo, and spending a significant amount of time in silent retreat, doing my Chan meditation practice, and living at the holistic, the Omega Institute for Holistic Studies. After that year, when I came back from China, I spent 2 months working with Danny Clark, the performance director from MoveNet, who's working right now beautiful. So yeah, in August, I took a little hiatus from the Omega Institute, and after doing Animal Flow L2 in Toronto with Mike Fitch, the founder of Animal Flow, I went and did, let's say, a volunteering / co-creation of a place called Sacred Acres Permaculture Research Facility in Vermont, which was started by Denny Clark, MoveNet's performance director. And he's got a lot of things too, but a big part of his thing is looking. So he runs pretty much MoveNet on a day-to-day basis, and he's the guy who oversees the whole curriculum at this point. Of course, Erwan still has his input and has the vision and all of that, but he's entrusted Danny to do a lot of that work. And so natural movement is his thing. And he sees permaculture as a natural expansion of that, right? Because natural movement is a movement system which, hola, baby. Just got a four-legged friend here.
Nice.
Natural movement is a movement system which honors the fact that we don't develop apart from our environment. We are fundamentally connected with our environment in so many different ways, both here and now, and then of course also in all the chains of cause and effect that bring our food to us, for example, and so on and so forth, right? And so for him, permaculture is creating a permaculture research site and then living there and then practicing natural movement while there. And then also, as you probably know, natural movement's a kind of perfect movement training system for hunting, gathering, foraging, all this kind of stuff. And then being able to practice that there while also planting and all of that all at the same place is like where a lot of things come together for him. And of course, for me, that brought a lot of things together for me, being there with him. I'd already lived at the Temple of the Way of Light down in Peru in the Amazon is also a permaculture and a holistic kind of integral ayahuasca practice and retreat and research center, right? So when I went and did this with Danny, we just connected on so many levels. And it was determined that I would come down here, between the two of us, that I would come down here. I would represent MoveNet in Colombia. I would help the Colombian population to learn about natural movement. I would facilitate certifications here. And I would also do, which leads to your second question, research on the ground to find out and develop the possibilities for creating this kind of integral natural movement retreat and research center. And so doing kind of, doing these things all at once, because you can do them in the same place if I was somewhat organized, which I was. So I was organized enough to make it so that I came down here in October, and we managed to organize a MoveNat immersion that was, I would say, highly successful, and we'll be releasing some awesome content for that very soon. We did that in March, right before COVID came. So COVID coming to Colombia was like a massive stick being thrown into the spokes of this wheel of progress, but that's okay, because that kind of going inward has also giving me some chances to work on some things. So that's been cool. But also us putting out the information about the immersion that we had set for March caused some people here in Colombia who had been following MoveNat from afar, who are involved in the soccer, the football world here, to reach out and say, "Oh, you guys, you're finally coming to Colombia. I've been following you." And so a former professional player of the biggest professional sports team, period, in Colombia, which is called Atlético Nacional, which is the biggest soccer team, and soccer is the biggest sport, who's now has a strength and conditioning organization aimed at elite soccer players, reached out to us, told us, "How can I help you guys?" And we ended up becoming fast friends. I ended up training his whole team in the basics of MoveNat, and we're working on getting them certified and so on and so forth. And he said, "Hey, I have, the strength and conditioning coach of Atlético Nacional is my mentor. He trusts me a lot on this. He already was FMS, functional movement systems. He already has integrated that into the strength and conditioning program at Atlético Nacional. And MoveNat is a kind of natural progression of that." So he recommended that we go to their site, their training center, in a place between where I live now and Medellin proper, the city. And so we went there, Danny and I, and we had a meeting. We did a little demo. They loved it. They said, "Please, let's do it together." And so there are some details, some contractual details that I won't go into at this moment. But long story short, we went back again, did a bigger, longer training for all of their team, and they're very interested in doing some big things together that if this coronavirus hadn't happened, we would already be kind of in the national consciousness, the way that we'd be in the national consciousness in the States if the Patriots came out and said MoveNat, natural movement, is the official movement system of our team. And they also have this really cool vision of like connecting people with the environment and connecting people with themselves. And so check it out. And, multiple years of that as the whole trainer team also gets, let's say, keeps getting certified up the chain of certifications from level 1 to level 2 up to level 3 and so on and so forth. And therefore, because it is the biggest professional sports team in Colombia, therefore negating all of this need to explain any kind of evolutionary rationale for MoveNat or like connection to the nature and all of this, which is beautiful and why I'm into it. But for so many people, they're just not there yet. But they are there to be like, "Oh, wow, Atlético Nacional is using this system to perform better and to have less injuries and to build their team camaraderie even more," right? So that's that's something that's still in the works.
So Johnathan, where can we follow your work?
Yeah.
About what you're doing now, and then kind of see how your vision unfolds in the near future.
So with all of this coronavirus
we're on a total lockdown here. It's a bit different in Colombia, the way that they handle things because of their the past of violence here. They're quick to lock things down, and they're able to do that, and people listen because they've been conditioned in that way, let's say. So we're quite locked down, and this has really caused me to look at solutions for bringing what I do online, which is a positive thing anyway, because that's where so many things have been flowing for so many years anyway, right? And so with that said, I'm still working out my system for being fully online. With that said, people to find me can find me at, there are two good places. One would be my Instagram. That's very simple. If you have Instagram, it's at the Recon John on Instagram. So you can find me there. You can follow me there. And then if you have any type of inquiry, any questions about what we spoke about in this podcast, just want to say hi. Or if you're interested in holistic natural movement coaching, you can reach me at JAL at mindfulandmoving.com. JAL at mindfulandmoving.com.
I'll make sure to include both of those in the show notes so people can easily copy paste and put into their system to contact you and or follow you. Johnathan, it's been great to talk to you. I can't wait to see how your whole vision unfolds, either online or in person there in Colombia. Let's definitely stay in touch and see if we can work together to make your vision a reality.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. It's been beautiful. I feel like I feel like we're just getting started. So
we are. Beautiful. Definitely so. First of many conversations.
Yes, sir. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Take care. God bless.